Over the Garden Wall is now officially 11 years old. And still, every year the show has seemed to continuously bring in new viewership, who get entranced right along with Greg and Wirt into the unknown. Watching Over the Garden Wall has become a yearly tradition for me for the past 5 years during October. I love it so much that for my birthday last year, I rented out a small cabin in a wooded area and watched it with my friends. And let me tell you, that was one of my favorite birthdays I've ever had. But as much as I truly wholeheartedly love this show, there was always one episode that I never truly understood and felt was nonsensical, kind of wanting to skip it every rewatch. But this time around, knowing that the show is filled to the brim with symbolic messaging, I wanted to attempt to actually pay extremely close attention to this particular episode, instead of dismissing it like I always have every watch. Leading me to realize that the episode I always couldn't stand is not only the deepest in terms of thematic exploration, but is actually surprisingly the most disturbing episode in the entire series. I'm talking about episode 8, titled Babes in the Wood. On a surface level, this episode is Greg having a fantastical dream about having fun with angels and talking animals, which could also just be perceived as a full-on acid trip. I remember feeling so dumbfounded the first time I witnessed all of this. It came off as pure filler and absolute anarchy. I remember getting to the end of the credits and having a moment of silence before asking my girlfriend what the hell we just watched. And she couldn't tell me. She's seen it a billion times, and even she was always lost when getting to this part in the series. But folks, let me tell you, I feel like I have come upon the actual truth behind the seemingly cute and endearing dream of Greg's. And it all starts with its setting. It is very clearly supposed to be an over-exaggerated and stereotypical version of heaven. And the show by the end makes it pretty clear that the unknown is some type of spiritual purgatory. Especially given the fact that the beast takes lost souls. As in souls that don't even know that they are dead. They aren't in heaven, and they aren't in hell. They're lost in between. So spiritual imagery in this context isn't exactly the surprising part, but it's extremely important to acknowledge, because I'm not exactly convinced that this is a dream. At the very start of this Cloud City set piece, Greg wishes to the stars, and then when the light shines down and brings the angel heads, Greg quite literally astral projects out of his body and goes up into the sky with the rest of the angels. And one of the first things he is greeted with is 3 kids that look identical, all with boat hats and clocks on their stomachs, called the reception committee, who end up looking down at their clocks, and then when they look back up, they have a look of frustration and impatience as they await for Greg. Once he fully arrives, they are happy to see him and welcome him in, and showcase the other committees. And we'll get to why they seem so agitated in a bit, because I want to move on to the next standout oddball thing that we witness. When Greg asks them if there's any more committees, it smash cuts to an ugly dog staring off with a cloud over his head. Cutting back to Greg, who for a brief moment looks serious or even scared before snapping out of it and smiling, saying, "Well, that's enough." Which is supposed to be a random funny gag, but of course with pretty much everything in Over the Garden Wall, that is never the case. Another thing we'll come back to unpack. Moving on from there, we get another musical number where Greg is asked if he wants to lead their band in a song. They end up singing all about how wonderful Cloud City is and attempt to invite him to stay, singing, "Our songs are filled with love, the sweetest love, and we can send it down to you with a little shove. So hitch a ride in the sky and join our little band." But something goes wrong when during the song, Greg gets stuck in a trombone and shot out into the air, breaking a gate and letting the old north wind and his sidekicks into Cloud City, where they start destroying everything. Greg steps up and takes them all down, including the big bad north wind, trapping him in a bottle. He is then thanked by the Queen of the Clouds for his bravery and granted a wish. Greg asks for him and Wirt to be sent home, but she says Wirt is now claimed by the beast, as she shows an image of him being entangled with the Edelwood branches in his sleep, telling Greg he's too lost. So Greg decided to ask for another wish and whispers in the Queen's ear, which in turn makes her sad, but obliges the wish nonetheless. A wish we don't hear. It immediately cuts back to the unknown, where Greg attempts to speak to Wirt, and it only leads to Wirt to grow more irritated with Greg, turning his back towards him, with Greg's body right behind, taking up most of the screen, until he turns around, revealing the most disturbing moment in the whole series. The Beast lingering on in the background as eerie music builds up, having the Beast beckon Greg to him, with Greg, of course, following behind into the darkness with the beam. That moment was already so impactfully unsettling because of how much of a harsh tonal and visual shift from the cuteness of Cloud City to this was. But with everything you're about to find out, it makes that moment even more gut-wrenching. So what did all of this mean exactly? Over the Garden Wall has kept people rewatching it for over a decade now because there was so much density in its symbolic narrative. And this episode is the greatest example of that. Let's start off only a few minutes before Greg is taken to Cloud City. We see him, the frog, and Wirt all on a boat still in search for their way home. Greg is still extremely whimsical and is attempting to keep the mood positive while Wirt is now at an all-time low point, leading to him lashing out at Greg, telling him that they are completely lost and they have to not only accept it and the fact that they aren't going home, but that essentially they have to give up, which is exactly what Wirt ends up doing. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because this exchange of dialogue right here is the key to understanding this entire episode. Like stated earlier, we already understand that the unknown is some type of purgatory and their spirits are trapped between a life and death, with the Beast feeding off lost souls. Well, in this episode, we find out how exactly he does that. He follows them until they give up, until they allow death to take them. That's when the Edelwood traps them, allowing him to consume their souls, because they've already given them up themselves. This entire episode is about Greg's subconscious processing the idea of death, and accepting it as we see it through a childlike lens. If you're around my age, in your early 20s or late teens, your parents have most likely shown you older movies and media growing up, meaning there's a good chance some of your favorite movies are from the 80s. Well, if we look in the context clues given to us in episode 9 of the show, it seems like Wirt and Greg come from the 70s. So presumably their parents could have passed down media from the 30s and 40s, specifically cartoons, as we see the art style of Cloud City depicted in Walt Disney or Fleischer-esque style, having Greg use his favorite children's medium as a visual example and coping mechanism to showcase the idea of dying and going to heaven. Which, speaking of going to heaven itself, when Greg is greeted by the reception committee, their irritation and impatience grows when they look at their clocks, which suggests that Greg is late showing up to heaven. He was expected a long time ago, but his soul has been lost in the unknown. But as we continue moving on through explaining the oddities of Cloud City, we see the ugly dog. Now, this seems to actually symbolize a lot of things. First off, it represents Greg himself, and everything the dog symbolizes is an extension of Greg. Dogs are known for their compassion and their loyalty, something we see countless times within Greg's relationship with Wirt, Beatrice, and even his many differently named frog. But when you look at the dog itself, he looks worn out and exhausted as a rain cloud pours down above his head. This whole visual is something Greg dismisses quickly because he doesn't want to acknowledge the mixture of exhaustion and sadness he feels, which is the main thing the ugly dog represents. It's showing that even among all the positivity Greg shows externally, internally he is worn out and is quietly turning miserable, something he doesn't want to accept, which leads him to wanting to join in on the song. And now that we understand that the episode is about accepting death, the quoted line from earlier, "Our songs are filled with love, the sweetest love, and we can send it down to you with a little shove, so hitch a ride in the sky and join our little band," doesn't exactly need explanations. It's simply them trying to entice Greg to allow his soul to be one with them in this heavenly state. Something that Greg doesn't get to contemplate long enough for because he accidentally brings out the Old North Wind. Who is the Old North Wind anyway? Well, that's an easy one. He's an extension of the Beast and everything he symbolizes, which is mainly despair. And because Greg defeats despair, When the Queen of the Clouds tells him that Wirt now as we understand it is essentially killing himself, allowing death to consume him, that because only Greg defeated despair, only he can go to heaven. But Greg sees it in a different way. If he already defeated despair for himself, he believes he can do it for Wirt, which is why he decides to give himself up to the beast. Now, wrapping it all together with the real world context of their bodies literally dying in a river, and once again, this is all just showcasing a child accepting death for themselves. Which now gives me an even deeper sense of grotesqueness when I see the moment the beast comes to take Greg. This episode and the entirety of the series is a brilliant example in understanding the seriousness of how hope can actually mean the difference between life and death. Every day, people take their own lives because they don't have any more hope left, and it's of utter importance to be able to provide it for them. Every moment, despair is in our veins. It drains our energy, motivation, compassion, empathy, willpower, and most of all, our want to live. It strips away our humanity until we are nothing more than a shriveled up being, tangled in the vast sea of emotion, where we too become lost souls traveling around, attempting to find our salvation. Projects like these are the greatest of reminders to not only understand when we ourselves are in so much pain that we have to learn how to reach out for help, but all of us as human beings to spread hope to all we can. Because at the end of the day, that is the most extraordinary thing any creature on this earth can create.